Everybody.
Good morning.
Let's rise. We have a quorum, so let's rise and
Do the flag.
do the flag. Imagine the flag that is over there in the corner, and I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. You know, it's amazing. I haven't said that for years until I came on the commission. It's amazing you get that drilled into you in elementary school. It just stays with you.
It's also amazing that we can all look at a quilt and think it was the flag.
Exactly,
Yes.
exactly. We do have a quorum. Can I have a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you. Are there any changes? If not, those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Thank you. The commission is open for public comment. Is there anybody in the public here who wishes to comment?
None was received before either, so.
Hearing none, I will close the public comment, and then I will turn it over to you, Mr. Boney, for the presentations.
All right, no presentations today.
Oh, sorry.
No, that's all right.
Consent agenda, then, we can go right to that?
So on the consent agenda today, you have the minutes from the February 28th, 2024 meeting. You have our annual application to VDOT for FY 2025 Rural Transportation Work Program, which is funding in the form of $58,000 from FHWA, Federal Highways Administration, through VDOT that supports transportation planning efforts, also some GIS work at the commission. There's a work plan included there as well. The 2024 regional CDBG priorities, which are unchanged from 2023. And then the FY 2024 year-to-date revenues and expenditures.
Before we have questions, they'll have an approval, because they're minutes, I'll have approval of the consent agenda. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. Any questions about any of the information included? If not, those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. Now,
All right, so I'll be brief on the director's report. A couple items that I did want to update all of you on. So the first item is, as mentioned in February, there are two budget amendments that remain pending. Anybody that's following the General Assembly and the governor's vetoes and the budget work they're doing. I know General Assembly is back there today. It sounds like there may be a special session to handle vetoes, budget, and potentially the skill gaming issue. The two budget amendments that would impact the regional commission here remain in after the governor's amendments, and so again, that's $25,000 additionally for each of the 21 planning districts per year, which would take the total amount to just under $115,000 that we would get through the General Assembly without many strings attached. And then the budget for the $25,000 for each continuum of care lead agency, which we serve as one, are also remain in there. So we'll continue to follow, and potentially that would impact the budget that I'll present in just a minute. Did want to share the Food Policy Council with Michelle Edwards and Mallory Grady as staff on that earlier this month, and the main item for discussion was the Ag Census data that was released. It's the 2022 Ag Census of the data, even though it doesn't get released till 2024. It's got some lag time in there, but we have posted on the website there, and I'm happy I'll share with anyone afterwards, the summary documents for each of the counties, and then tabular format for the region. In general, one of the trends that they talked about with the Food Council was the decrease in number of farms, but the increase in agritourism operations that showed up in that data as well. So if there's an interest from any of you at a county or town level, I'm sure Michelle would be happy to come out and speak about the data that we've tracked there. I know we've asked for a lot of survey input recently. There's going to be another one coming up for our commuter services program. That's through a mandated strategic plan from Department of Rail and Public Transportation, but that'll probably go out in a couple weeks. But anybody that, really our commuter services program historically has been one that focused on out commuting rather than within the region, but we're looking at all of the opportunities, again, with telework and remote work as well. So feel free to share that when you see that come out. And then the last thing I'll mention is just, recently, it feels like in the past month or month and a half, myself and Jennifer Little have been out at various, either local nonprofit groups or at Rappahannock County at their Board of Supervisors, as well as the Culpeper Human Services Board. Really just talking in general about housing trends that we've seen, and some of the impacts on the region and some of the potential opportunities there. So just wanted to make you aware, again, if there's a benefit to speaking with any of your groups, doesn't need to be the board or town council, but if there's a group within the county or your town that you want us to speak with, we're happy to. Jennifer's actually at the Madison United for Nutrition and Community Health Munch meeting this morning, so yeah, we're in and out with all those things. So those are the main things I wanted to highlight, but I'm happy to answer any other questions about what we've been up to.
Any questions? If not, let's move on to old business. Looks like we have, if we can have brief, and I'll stress brief only because there is food here waiting, ladies and gentlemen. Is there any discussion on the broadband projects? Any updates? Okay.
Still wait and see, is that?
We have an extension on our project that was approved by DHCD, so it's moved from February past to next February as our deadline to have it 100% complete.
When did Old Points reach out to you to tell you that they're going to apply for that? Or did you apply for it?
Well, we applied for it with them,
Yeah.
but it's been a couple months ago, we turned it in. And
I expect
got
they'll all be approved,
Okay.
We do have some fiber finally being strung, but it's in Dominion and still haven't made it inroad with REC.
All right, moving on to the Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy.
Yeah, and I've got a set of slides up on the board. I'm going to move through these, not quickly, because one thing I want to share is that this process started this is the region's first Comprehensive Economic Development Strategy. This process started kickoff meeting February of last year. And then if you recall, the consultant team that we're working with Camoin Associates, was with the committee in last June to kind of do a facilitated discussion about priorities and sort of where we were with the SEDS plan. We are getting ready to release the draft SEDS plan. That'll probably be Monday, going out by a press release. And EDA, US EDA, who's the funding agency and the federal oversight agency on this, has a mandated 30-day comment period. So as part of that release, we're sharing this update with you, but also we'll note that once we've gone through that 30-day comment period, we'll have a presentation in June from the consultants with the final plan for your consideration of adoption. Here, so you can see here the project overview. One of the reasons that this is sort of a unique process, the SEDS in Virginia at least has historically been handled and completed at the regional commission level. So a lot of regional commissions either have existing SEDS and have them for a long time, especially if they're in areas of distress, economic distress, Southside Virginia, Southwest, other areas. Our region, the Rappahannock-Rapidan region, and our partners to the south at Thomas Jefferson Planning District were two of the, I think, 4 regions in Virginia that did not have a SEDS previously. So we had partnered with TJPDC, and then because we're aligned with Go Virginia Region 9, also partnered with the Go Virginia Council to submit 2 applications, one from TJPDC and one from our regional commission. But would conduct the process in parallel, procure the same consultant together, work together. We have bi-weekly conference calls where we've got our staff and TJPDC working together. And that was one of the unique things about our approach, and I think one of the reasons why, even though we're not generally considered an economically distressed region, that EDA was excited about kind of working through this. So again, it's aligned with Go Virginia Region 9. The outcomes of this are a comprehensive economic development strategy for our region, for our 5 counties, a separate comprehensive economic development strategy for the TJPDC region. There will be overlaps in terms of some of the strategies, but it will also allow us to focus on some of the unique things of each region. And then with some of the Go Virginia funding, we'll have what we've termed super regional strategies that can be implemented throughout both of the planning districts and in consort with Go Virginia Region 9. The SEDS has a 5-year time span, and then following the approval of the SEDS by EDA, we will provide annual updates in terms of implementation. The main upshot for you all at local governments is it does open up additional federal funding resources that are typically not readily available if you don't have a SEDS, and these would be for potentially for infrastructure, for workforce type projects, and a lot of those things that will show up in the final plan. So where we are, you can see project kickoff was last February. We've gone through a kind of a baseline summary of economic conditions, stakeholder and partner engagement, including with many of you, as well as with partners in your economic development offices, tourism staff. Both community colleges in the region have been very active. I want to specifically call out Dr. Gullickson and Kim Blosser from Laurel Ridge. Both have been, if not 100% attendees on our strategy committee calls, then very much have sent staff if they've not been able to participate. There's been private sector representation from chambers and others that have been involved with Go Virginia. Did a business survey back in the fall to again kind of marry up with some of the data and qualitative and quantitative responses that we got through the data collection, and also did some focus groups in each of the 5 counties back last June when the consultants were here. Really where we are right now is finalizing the strategy development and then developing the final SEDS plan, and so that says February to March. We're about a month behind, but we actually pushed TJPDC first because their grant through EDA has a much shorter landing period, so they're about a month ahead of us at this point. So this is employment by key sectors, and if you can see here, this is grouped into 4 different categories. One is called leading, we've got maturing, lagging, and then emerging. And so what that means is, leading means you've got a high level of concentration of those jobs, so construction and retail trade, and this is compared to other regions. And also, have a high location quotient, and then a pretty decent share of the region's jobs. So in this case, construction is about just under 10% of the region's jobs, with a location quotient of 1.7. If you're not familiar with location quotients, that anything at 1 means your average in terms of how much is concentrated. Above 1 means you're higher than average, compared to, again, other regions, across the state and the nation. Maturing is sort of the same, where it might be something that has historically been and continues to be a high presence, but maybe losing some jobs. So in this case, ag, forestry, fishing, and hunting has a high location quotient, but has seen a negative job change in the 5-year period. These are from 2017 to 2022. And then emerging would be the other one that I would call out, and that really is an area which may not be a high location quotient. Manufacturing is right at 1. Professional, scientific, and technical services are a little bit below 1 at 0.8. But the job change numbers are where you see the significant growth. So professional, scientific, and technical services has grown 19% over that 5-year period. Manufacturing, 12%. And so those are areas where the region might be expected to, okay, how do we continue to facilitate that growth in those sectors? The lagging sectors are one where you've seen a negative job growth and also a lower location quotient. So accommodation and food services and healthcare and social assistance have seen. Healthcare and social assistance is probably closer to the middle if you were thinking of this as a chart type graph, but they would have negative job growth and location quotients. And this is another way of sort of reflecting that information, and what you see emerging down here in the bottom right. You see leading. I'm going to actually zoom in here and see if we can get into some of the details. And you may have seen this. I think they shared this back last summer, but it's just such an interesting way of interpreting and looking at the information. So you can see, again, the emerging ones, we've got administrative and support, we've got professional, scientific, and technical, education services, which is a little bit of a smaller circle, meaning it doesn't have as high of a concentration, and then manufacturing as well. So in general, I think you're looking at the ones to the right, on the right side of the chart, as the ones where you've got the positive, obviously, job growth, and on the higher, the y-axis there, you've got ones where you've got a higher location quotient. So the ones that are, again, government's largely in the middle, so it takes up a sizable number of the jobs in the region, but the location quotient is higher than average, but not, you know, way out of range, whereas you would see that with ag, forestry, fishing, and hunting.
So, I know this survey was done in partnership with the Thomas Jefferson Planning District. When I see the scientific and, I can't remember what it is, in the lower right,
Yep.
is that warped a little bit because you have a major university that has more of an influence, and so it doesn't really pertain as much to our district as it does at TJ?
That's a really good question. Actually, the first time this was presented to us last summer, it was presented as Go Virginia Region 9, and we said we need to see that separately. So this is just the 5 counties in our region. So
Okay.
I don't have Thomas Jefferson's committed to memory offhand, but I would imagine you'd see this having a larger circle and probably a higher location quotient on that piece. All right, so the next item, one of the next things that we looked at was, and again, an EDA requirement for SEDS is resiliency and vulnerability. And so the way that this was collected or represented was there's 4 categories. And so we have, we've got social resiliency and vulnerability, we've got economic, we've got environmental, and we've got infrastructure. And in general, and I'm gonna scroll over here to the right side, the ideal position on these is in the lower right quadrant, which means you have a high resilience and a low vulnerability. So you have, you know, your low vulnerability means you don't have a lot of, you know, assets and investment in those areas, or they're not, you know, likely vulnerable to natural disasters or other economic impacts. And then high resiliency would obviously be, even if they are impacted, there's a strong network in place to respond to those and to address those. So you can see on social, economic, and environmental, we're most of the region, and I'll send these, the slides have been posted to the website, I'll send them out certainly after the meeting, and you can dig into them there if you want. In general, most of the region falls either right on the line in terms of resiliency, or in the positive category for environmental, economic, and social. I think on the infrastructure side, which is the chart on the bottom right here, what we see is we've got low vulnerability, but also low resilience, and I think that, you know, can be borne out of, you know, there's not as much infrastructure in certain cases, but also the impacts could be, you know, quite severe if the you know, timing was right or wrong, as you want to phrase it. And we did a pretty deep dive with the committee on this. One of the meetings was basically all into resiliency and vulnerability. And there is an appendix document that will be part of the report that is specific to the resilience and vulnerability assessment that was done for the region. So this chart, and again, we've got the color coded here, but what we did with the strategy committee and some other feedback sources was look at, in terms of stakeholder input on what the opportunities were in terms of high perceived need, which is the orange dots, yellow meaning there's a moderate perceived need or opportunity for growth, and then green means a low perceived need. And so this was really just a process to identify, okay, what are the assets currently in place, where might be opportunities for you know, investment, or just frankly in terms of the EDA process, where might we look to, you know, seek funds and assistance through EDA to address some of these needs. And so the categories on the left are state of the local economy, so business viability, revenue sources, industry diversity, risks to the economy, including supply chain, resilience, growth issues and pressures, infrastructure availability, climate and environmental issues such as natural resources and development balance, and then economic development resources and partners. And so this is not meant to be, I think a lot of people saw this on the strategy committee first and were thinking, oh, this is a report card. And it's not meant to be a report card, it's really meant to be, okay, here are opportunities, again, even with, you know, with Culpeper and Falk here that may have more assets or capacity currently, still looking at identifying, okay, where are those opportunities to bring in additional outside revenues to support, you know, whatever opportunities and growth options they want to take on.
And see the,
Yeah.
Thank you.
And as I said, the public comment period that's open, I mean, certainly any of you are welcome to send comments straight to me. There will be a process, but we're also, this is not meant to be, this is very much in draft, and so when it goes out, you know, feedback and you know, suggestions are welcome during that process as well.
Patrick, I just want to make sure I understand. I'm not sure I understand the phrase need and or opportunity for growth. So if orange is moderate, or the county of Orange, the yellow is moderate, does that mean we have a moderate need or we have a moderate opportunity? Because to me, those are two different things. Just like if we had an orange circle, does that mean we have a great high opportunity or we have a great need for the opportunity? I'm not sure I understand.
No, that's a good point. So you're correct on the latter question. So if it's high perceived need, it means there's a lot of, there's a lot of need. I don't say a lot of needs, but there is a high need in terms of there's not a lot of development there. So if we're talking about infrastructure, if there was an orange dot, it would say, you know, there's not a lot of infrastructure available, or the infrastructure that is available may be at capacity. So there would be a high need. But I think the reason we added an opportunity there is because we also want to recognize that, you know, across our region, there's different desires for what that means. So just because you have high need doesn't mean that you need to immediately jump at that. So I think on the moderate side, what I would say is there's a need. It's not something that's immediately pressing and it needs to be addressed immediately. But I would also say that it recognizes that the desire to address that need is not necessarily indicative of, just because it's there doesn't mean that the locality or the region says, here's our top priority. I think it's sort of the way I would.
It's like the
phrase
industry diversity in Rappahannock County. There's not a lot of that
Right.
by design,
Right.
and I suspect not a lot of desire for that. There's still a gap.
Right. And so, and again, I think that's why I would try to phrase it as it's not so much a report card saying, and you know, originally I will say it was red instead of orange, and I think people were like, wait a minute, what is that? You know, I'm freaking out here. I think what I would say is it's exactly right. There's a need, but that does not mean that, okay, the point of this plan is not to say, find that need and immediately address it. It's to say, the need's there. If there's a solution that might be possible or is supported, then this plan could back that up. But it doesn't mean that you have to go out and do that.
But I think at first glance, sometimes they look like opposites, but they actually correlate. When you have a high perceived need, obviously there's a ton of room for growth. If you need the growth, and moderate and low follow the same way. So why it might pitch at first as being opposites, obviously they go together. They go together.
No, this is helpful because I'm going to take this back to the team and have them, you know, let's see if we can do some clarifying in terms of how to interpret that.
So is this graph then basically the perception is based upon a common standard, or is it based upon the?
I think this is what I would classify as rather than the quantitative data, I think this would be the qualitative, you know, approach of the consultant team first based on their field work, and then doing some vetting with the strategy committee, and would basically be a representation of instead of the qualitative, you know,
Right.
input.
And it, as it says, it's a perception that's based upon a standard or a model or something.
I think based on, frankly, in this case, based on the consultant team, their professional, you know, insight, and again, with some vetting and some,
Yeah.
you know, revision based on comments at the strategy committee meeting.
Okay.
Folks from Orange, does that ring true that your infrastructure is solid? And I guess infrastructure, you're talking about roads, water, sewer, gas, things you need for economic development?
Yeah, I think that's generally where we talk about, not so much it includes the physical, but also is how's the climate there in terms of the business climate and support for it.
So does that ring true for y'all from Orange?
I think so. We've got space in Business Park. We've got
You have water and sewer and gas?
So right.
And
Fire.
connectivity is a big thing that we're
Yeah.
kind of ahead of the game on.
And Madison, Rappahannock, you all feel like you don't have those things? Does that ring true?
I would definitely agree.
All right.
The resilient, or the supply chain would be the one, the resilience I would have a question on from Madison County.
Okay.
Just in general, how that is, that information is collected. What message should that communicate? Is it lack of, you know, like for us, we don't have a lot of major roads. We have 29s or something interrupted on 29.
No interstate rail sort of.
Yeah, that is your resiliency. So would that be what's trying to be conveyed there?
Yeah, I think that, you know, my eyes are pretty good, but I think it's risks to economy, and so I think, you know, in terms of supply chain resilience, you know, growth is huge pressure. And, you know, I think probably also, you know, historically, if it's, you know, I'm not saying specifically for Madison, but I think in general, if it's a, you know, highly reliant on, you know, not so much revenue diversity, but just in general, if the economy is not diverse, I think that's a risk that would be, you know, included there. And some of that comes out from that resiliency and vulnerability information I shared too.
Okay. Thank you.
So what do we do with this?
Well, with this specific slide, I would say, you know, if you absolutely feel like something isn't right, then let's incorporate that, and we can make some of those changes. I think in terms of the plan itself, it's really, again, as the first SEDS for the region, it's really meant to sort of lay the foundation for here are some of the things that have been identified in a lot of cases previously at each county and town. I mean, a lot of the sources for this came from existing plans in terms of strategies and things like that. But I would also say from a long-term perspective, it's okay. If this is something that's identified here and we feel like there's a need for, like in this case, I'm looking at, you know, infrastructure is one where there's 2 oranges, 2 yellows, and a green. And if that's something where we feel like, okay, is there a local or a regional, you know, approach to sort of addressing that? If there's the support for that, then you start, you know, building those conversations around that. Again, the immediate impact is it potentially opens up some federal revenue sources as well as other revenue sources to address some of those
So will
needs.
this be seen by people who are in charge of grants or anything like that?
It would be something, I mean, an immediate thing would be, I would anticipate hearing from staff at counties and towns, hey, we've got a grant going in, can I reference this, where does this fit within the SEDS? And then we would respond and say, yeah, it absolutely fits into one of the strategies or the goals that we've identified.
So one last point is that for some of us who have some color blindness, we're having a little difficulty with this graph.
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. All right, got a couple more slides here. So here's the identified goals, and these are very high level. You know, expand economic potential for existing industries and prepare the region to take advantage of growing markets. So back to that kind of emerging markets or emerging sectors that I referenced earlier. Implement or adapt industry-focused initiatives that draw on cross-sector collaboration for talent retention, advancement, and attraction. And we spent a lot of time with the strategy committee talking about workforce, and workforce certainly fits into the SEDS. And I think one of the things that I would, as somebody that's in an organization and not involved with workforce programs, there's a lot of stuff going on in workforce. It's not always collaborative or in partnership with each other, and so I think that's an area where pushing for some of those organizations that are working in the workforce development field to again, you know, have a focused, you know, structure and a collaborative approach is something that came up several times during our discussions. Supporting elements of the built environment that meet the demand of today and then lay the foundation for advancing dynamic economy in the future. And then making strategic investments in critical infrastructure systems that will elevate the competitiveness of the region's production. And so generally what these identified goals are meant to do is to, you know, frankly cover a lot of bases so that if you do have a project that you know, you're looking for funding for or that you're wanting to push, you know, through a federal program or through when a Congress representative reaches out and said, hey, we've got this funding available and we'd like you to apply for it real quick. It allows you to identify, yes, this has already been, you know, included in a regional plan and has been identified as a priority or fits into a regional plan's identified goals.
Do we see this from the industry standpoint? Do we have access to industry advocates, summaries for needs from the community to support their sector of business? So we see it from their standpoint. This is what we like. If we're going to either build, stay, move there, do we have something that states the way they see the world, and so we understand how they see the world, and we're assessing their needs?
Right. I think some of that comes in from the field work that the consultants have done. I don't know that we have something that
they know that
right.
They would have that.
I think that's where we would build this into. But I would also say that again, this is a regional plan, and so a lot of times when you've got a business looking to relocate or something else, they have some very specific needs that, you know, what our goal here would be to say, yes, we're open to that if we are open to it.
Right, and we would address that specifically, but, you know, for general infrastructure and general level of internet, roads, type of roads, education levels, how to evaluate that, what they're looking for.
Right. And so real quickly, as I mentioned, there's the super regional strategy. So this is the Go Virginia work that would cover both our region and TJPDC. And so the Go Virginia focuses, just so if you might recall, food and beverage manufacturing, IT and telecommunications, defense and intelligence. It says corridor, generally from Northern Virginia to Charlottesville area. The workforce consortium and that workforce focus. Site readiness, which is one that Go Virginia has spent a lot of time trying to figure out, okay, how do we, continue to support, those areas and those jurisdictions that are looking to develop sites. And then these two that are complements, they're not really Go Virginia, wouldn't qualify for Go Virginia funding, but tourism obviously is a big driver in both regions. And then housing, which is something where it fits into the workforce discussions, but also a lot of the other pieces as well, just not likely to be funded through Go Virginia, but were discussed with the larger group. And so then really where we've been for the last month or so is trying to identify who's going to advance these strategies. And I think probably one of the first things I said at the kickoff meeting was, this is not a plan that's going to be listing the regional commission as the implementer of every single strategy at the end of the day. This is one where ideally we've got all of these partners identified and working together, and frankly with some of the strategies that they're already working on, and that we can reference that and allow them to keep doing their work, potentially with some additional support, either capacity wise or if we're able to find funding. So that's generally where we are here, and what you'll see in the draft plan is where we've got strategies identified. There are also references to here are the implementation leads in terms of organizations, or in some cases like community colleges, specifically, that would be responsible for that. And so here's where we are. So as I said, we're here. We refined the strategies with the SEDS committee in March. We've got a finalized draft coming up, likely a draft plan to be released next week, and then a month of stakeholder review and public comment. And then in June, Camoin staff will present the final plan to the commission for adoption, and then it would go to the U.S. Economic Development Administration for EDA approval. And then over the next 5 years, we'd be looking at, again, convening those partners that have worked on this, as well as new partners that might develop, at minimum at least once a year, but probably more often, to kind of review where we are, what opportunities may have arisen, and where we're missing things as we move through that 5-year period. So I appreciate the questions thus far. I'm happy to answer more. All the materials are out on our website as well at the SEDS page.
Hearing no questions, let's move on to the draft, a budget. As I understand, this will be come up for action at the June 26th meeting. Mr. Corney, are you going to be here for that meeting?
I look forward to it.
All right, thank you. Because I'm going to be away, so you'll chair.
I'll put a big note on my calendar.
There you go. I can think of no better person to be running a numbers
There you go.
business meeting than you. Today is really just to look at the numbers, have a chance to look at them, and get information back to staff if you see something. Am I correct?
That's right, yeah. The bylaws require that we present this to you all before June 1st, and so since we don't have a May meeting usually, that's why it's usually here in April. I'm happy to make just a couple of comments.
Yes, please.
Mind. Sure. So the draft budget, we're just a little bit, about $200,000 down from the current year's amended budget. It's about $2,524,000. Revenues and expenses are currently balanced. As I said, we're still waiting on a couple of those General Assembly amendments to work itself out in the state budget, but those are not included here, so that would potentially free up additional revenues for the commission to identify where we want to put those. Local dues, again, same rate, the 83 cents. That's about 7.2% of the budget this year. The spending or the revenue decreases because of projects that are just working their way through, so especially the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation grant and the SEDS plan that I just mentioned, as we've paid up most of that through the consultant and won't have those expenses moving forward. On the expense side, the main thing I would want to call is I do include a minimum 4% salary increase and additional funds for merit increases where those would be available. our health insurance rate, I think many of you probably are facing the same thing. Ours is going up 10% this year. Our VRS contribution remains pretty low. We have a surplus in our VRS account at this point. And then the only other thing I would say, there's a couple other pending revenues, and I think that's on the second to last page. You can see the two General Assembly amendments, and then we do have a couple of outstanding grants that we expect to hear probably in the next 2 to 3 months, and both of those would be multi-year grants as well. But I feel like we're continue to be in a good place with the budget for April, and we'll make any changes and present them back to you in June.
You say 4% cost of living,
Correct.
and is that, we just passed a 3%.
So I pulled 4% from some of the discussions locally, but also looking at the consumer price index and inflation numbers. If 3% is preferred, we could go to that, but we can withstand 4% as well.
What's your, as people think about that, let me ask another question. Do you have a formula for the percentage of staff who would get merit in any given year?
No, traditionally we've done COLAs, and then we've most often done merit increases when we've done either promotions or moving into different steps there.
So you don't have a floor or a ceiling?
No, I mean, I think in this case the floor would, it's not going to be 4 to 50%. It's probably going to be 4 to 7 or 8 at most, and it would be based on performance.
If there are any, if there are any concerns or questions or anything, how is the best way for them to share those with you?
I mean, I'm happy to meet individually. I'm happy to take a phone call, whatever's convenient. So.
Is it your goal to establish and pass this budget today, or?
No, this is
initial?
just presented as draft. This will, again, we've got 2 months until the June meeting, and that's when it would need to be.
Tear it up in June.
Yeah, we certainly
We
can.
can
And, depending on the state, we'll see what happens with General Assembly, but that, could have impacts as well. So.
How would you envision additional revenue from the state being infused? Because, the grant money's kind of tied off to expenditures, and our revenues, county revenues, town revenues, set out a per capita. It's just like extra revenue.
So, well, I mean, the state funding that we get in it's $89,971 for each of the PDCs, and that really is, sort of goes into, you can't use it to match state grants. So, like if we've got projects that are state funded, such as our commuter services program is entirely state funded. So we can't use the state money there, but then that's where we use local dues to offset that at 20% match. I think in this case, it opens up, I mean, it would need to be something that probably fits within our priorities, but it opens up, some flexibility in terms of, okay, can we cobble that together with other funds for staffing capacity if there's a priority? Is there a study that, potentially could be, undertaken with other funds as well? So, honestly, I'm sort of in wait and see mode on that one, but I do think, given where we are right now, it's.
Can you say again where the conference budget and the governor's, where does that extra money stand right now?
So it's within the budget that came through the conferees, and then the governor made his
Was
amendments.
how much?
25,000 for, just for the commission.
Yep.
There's also the 25,000 for the lead agency role, which, would be very specific to a program. For the homeless, Foothills Housing Network for the homeless services. So it remains in there after the governor's amendments the 233, I think. But it still doesn't feel like something that I would, say one way or the other that I feel confident.
So this effort that we're gonna do next could identify priorities
Sure.
that could benefit from potentially another 25 grand.
I think that's a fair way to put it, and I think that would be something that would be helpful as part of the discussion.
And hopefully we'll have more resolution to a lot of these questions by the time we meet in June.
I would hope so.
Okay.
Or it'll all be completely blown up.
Yeah, exactly. All right. At that point, I would offer that we take a break, get some.
Second.
Go ahead, Michael.
Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, board, I'm just delighted to be with you today and look forward to our next couple of hours of work. We're going to try to do a couple of things today. One is to hear the results of our survey and interview process, which probably many of you contributed to the survey. And then we're going to actually work on some of the issues through a process we call carousel. We'll get to that in just a few minutes. But I wanted to introduce myself. I just shook hands with Dustin. Where Patrick and Dustin know me is I worked with the Community Services Board last year, I guess it was, to conduct their strategic planning process. It was a pretty big effort and led to actually their name change. It was one of the recommendations that came from the group during that process, which I think is really interesting that they went ahead and did that. Anyway, my name is Mike Foreman. I have had a 36-year career with Virginia State Government. I worked with mostly natural resources agencies. I worked with forestry for 21 years and then conservation and recreation for the remainder. I am also employed by UVA part-time with the Institute for Engagement and Negotiation, where I do group process work, also strategic planning and organizational management kinds of things. I'm a certified mediator with Virginia Supreme Court, and I do all kinds of group process work with them as well. And lastly, I'm affiliated with the Center for Nonprofit Excellence in Charlottesville, and I know Cindy Colsa very well. Many of you may know her. She resides here. Anyway, I'm really glad to be here. And I thought I would open my work with planning district commissions all around the state has led me to the conclusion that this particular district, and there's a few others like you, are perhaps one of the most diverse geographically, diverse population type and size, land use, ranging from Madison to downtown Culpeper. So there's a lot of rural-urban interface and a lot of just very diverse and different things going on. So I thought I'd highlight that for you. I'm sure it's not lost on any of you, but this idea that, yes, sir.
Well,
Already a question.
Well, I just wondered why you're not in Richmond helping the General Assembly and the governor.
I did my time. I don't want to do any more of that time. That's kind of you to say. Anyway, you threw me off. Now I've lost my place. No, we're going to get going here in just a minute. I've got PowerPoint, which after lunch can be deadly, but I want to convey the information that came to us through the survey. And I want to also, before I forget, thank Patrick and his staff. They were great. We went through a full day of interviews of their programs on March 27th, so it's fairly recent information. So thank you, Patrick, for that and your support through this time period. Really appreciate it. So let's talk a bit about it, and we'll have time at the end. You can interrupt me if you want, if you have a question, but there'll be some question and answer time at the end as well. See if this will work. Yes. So how many of you are new? I knew Patrick indicated that some of you were new. So just 1, 2, and 3. Okay, great. So I included some ideas around planning district commissions, and my work nationally led me to the conclusion, I think Virginia, despite the critiques we may give her as the Commonwealth through time, has one of the most unique relationships between localities, towns, cities, and government, in that PDCs sort of, as a role, sit in the middle of that relationship a bit. And I think it's really an interesting dynamic that PDCs can respond to locality needs and requests, provide service in this realm, this space, as we might call it. So I put just some basic introductory information there for us to think about. 1968, when we all started, the PDCs, doesn't seem that long ago if you're my age, which I'll be 68 in August. But this idea that it's been it's been 60 years now or more, or whatever, around 60 or 55 years that the PDCs has been around. So in the Code of Virginia, it's listed to encourage and facilitate local government cooperation and state and local cooperation. So you not only serve that interface between locality and like a regional approach, but also the state as a whole too. So let's not forget that. And the orderly, I like the way this is worded, orderly and efficient development of the physical, social, and economic elements of the district through planning and encouragement and just facilitated events such as this today. So I wanted to provide that to you. I'm reminded that in front of you is the draft final report that I developed for Patrick and the commission. We're going to go through much of it today, but listed as final draft. I would admit to a critical error that actually Patrick pointed out was I mistakenly included Loudoun County in the original survey question. And of course, Loudoun County is not part of this commission's geography.
Thankfully, nobody responded from Loudon to skew the.
Yeah, I know, that's right. And I looked at it, I said, well, we didn't get any responses from Loudoun County. And I thought, well, that's odd. You know, I thought, well, I actually tried to justify why we got no response from Loudoun without realizing that you weren't part of the district. So I'll clarify that error when we produce the final report. Ah, we have another commission member? Okay, great. Did he get his name tag? Thank you.
Got a name tag for you.
There's that form now, too, Mr. Chairman. That's great. The key thing about what I want to convey, and I won't spend too much more time on this, is the idea that PDC provides a suite of services and programmatic elements to member local government. So that is, I mean, that's a given and a part of our program today a bit, but the idea that I'm looking at the SEDS data and the reports, I can guarantee one thing, that my graphics are less complicated than what you saw this morning in the SEDS data. Anyway, so the idea of grant application services, mapping information systems, I know John was here earlier from the staff, and transportation planning, just key elements of what entails and what's contained in PDC services to localities. And the dynamic is different localities need different things at different times, at different scopes and scales, right? So it's a pretty complicated situation. So here's our planning process overview. You know, I'm used to doing more full-blown strategic planning. The staff and the board's concurrence, we just thought we'd try to work today to identify some annual or maybe a year or two in advance, some goals and issues, and try to identify those and bring them to the table where the district and y'all and staff can decide what is rising to the top of what we can work on. And it's related to the SEDS data this morning, some of it's not. Some of it's more social and equity issues, not economic development. So got to keep this open-minded framework. So this take the temperature approach is what I've been labeling it myself. Just wanted to get some staff and stakeholder input on where the district, planning district commission lies with regard to localities. So we thought, well, let's do an electronic survey. I work with the university, so not only is grad student help available at very low, cheap rates, free as a matter of fact, but use of electronic systems like Qualtrics, you know, like a SurveyMonkey thing with great analytics is available. So that's what we decided to do. Patrick and staff provided the list from which the survey was sent to, and also we did interviews of staff. So we took the 4 program leads: transportation, housing, finance, and I'm missing one, environmental and natural resources, ag and food systems. So there's 4 program areas. And these are the questions, and they're listed in the report as well. We wanted to just get with those people, look at their programs, where there's the status of them, and where they thought the future lie ahead for them. I also thought that maybe not only their programmatic areas, but the mission of the commission itself was related to the program, the support levels, and how they thought things were going in general. Let's start with the interview content a little bit for transportation. A vital part of this particular commission's effort that's not the same everywhere. You should realize that particular new members, every district, these priorities shift and are aligned differently. So in one area, transportation is not as important as in the other. Not only is transportation important here, but it's related to the other issues such as housing and the environmental work, and just all related. So transportation is sort of this intermixing of an issue that is aligned with other things going on. There's not a separation from many of these issues, but particularly transportation. One of the issues that has come up is around the contract call center. And I know there's some future plans to have conversations with the Community Services Board around this. Apparently, it could be working more smoothly, and I don't want to overstate anything, but the idea of a call center to figure out who really needs the transportation services and how that interacts with members of the different communities, whether it's downtown Culpeper, or we're going to Orange County, or wherever the case may be. So services are different. There is a fear that the call center, if the service need increases and growth is continuing to occur, that there may be a different model or system used for the contract call center and getting people the services they need. So that's an issue to think about with your respective locales. Tying that transportation to what could be considered a change in the model of how we do development, housing, the new home development kind of thing, and tying to walkable communities and getting the whole system aligned properly, where transportation is servicing not only those new neighborhoods, but also the underserved community, right? So it's a pretty big, robust thing to think about to meet the demands. For environmental and food systems, I know Michelle Edwards before. When I worked at DCR, she used to work there as well. She is just a great staff person in this whole field of environmental and food systems and agricultural. I noted the SEDS data that like logging, natural resources, ag, sort of that mature business that's been around a long time, and thought to myself, well, I hear other places that those systems are, waning away, or logging is decreasing, or that as population increases. So I thought it was good to see some of that data earlier today. I also worked with the Carver Center and Cooperative Extension to do their planning process a little bit. So I'm familiar with the Carver Center's work, and I just think that's a model for a statewide implementation. I hope they utilize that statewide. I know Extension has decided to be a part of that and leading that effort. There seems to be, and I'm an environmental guy, so I work in natural resources, so the idea that when I was working in water quality issues, it was like, okay, water quality, Chesapeake Bay, you got sediment and nutrients and all that's impacting, that's the basic issue. So the TMDLs, total maximum daily loads, and the nutrient diet of communities and local waterways and that kind of thing. According to Michelle, there was sort of a decreasing emphasis on that, but more of an increasing emphasis on water supply and demand. I hope that resonates with you and your community, but she's indicating that that is the next issue. The issue, for example, of solar farms or solar facilities a few years ago has been dealt with successfully by this commission, as I understand, and all of your good work. So the next issue, there's always an issue coming up and emerging, and water supply seems to be the one that's coming up for this particular category of work for commissions. There is always important for commissions statewide to facilitate the conversation, to have the space. So in the case of this particular category, there's been a Land Use and Environment Committee operating for 12 years, as I understand. So that's a good, stable place where the commission can vet issues and keep the activity going. For housing, this is an area of tremendous growth for this commission's geographic area and others statewide as well. There hasn't been I understand it, the historical stability of this issue, like for the environmental one, they've been doing farming and ag systems, for example, been around a long time. They can kind of know what's going on. Housing and the homelessness issue are paired together here, in my thinking. Well, they're different, right? And housing is providing general housing, like long-term, versus homelessness issue and how housing and homelessness paired together is aligned and so forth. So it was described by staff that they've been building the plane while flying it, kind of an approach with this issue, and there could be a way for the commission to get maybe build the plane a little faster or something, right, to get it stable and get things going. So that's been an issue in the housing part. One key difference, and I didn't realize this, although my remarks earlier maybe speak to it without mentioning it exactly, is the housing and homelessness issue paired together varies greatly across this geographic area that you're all operating in. So to the extent that you could unify the message, not to sort of consolidate and be one message, but there may be some issues that emerge from your diverse set of perspectives that could lead the commission's work and staff work to be a little more concerted and more directed and so forth. So think of that general approach as not being all down here, everybody's all different, but sort of trying to bring out those issues that are aligned within the communities that you serve. Continue, there is of course, the state Department of Community Development, Housing, and so forth is a state agency, and they attempt to also coordinate the PDCs and localities. I think it can be a wonderful thing, but also can be a complicating factor. So the idea that it's a grant, they generate grants and can be a great partner with you, but just understand that maybe some of the other categories of PDC work may not be in the same way reflected because there's a state agency that's helping with this as well. There has been some bright spots, but staff indicated that the development community is beginning to better recognize the homeless housing issue and offering options for residents to have a home and to settle in and have a roof over their heads. Again, unifying county perspective remains to be an important element here. For finance and internal operations, administration, however you want to couch it, and when we go to our carousel group work a little later, that'll also be my miscellaneous category if you think of anything else. But this whole category of internal operations, it can be said that staff, we have a stable financial organization, since Patrick talked about the draft budget today. Stable, things are solid. There is the only issue that came up that I could see could be a point of discussion for the board would be the physical space that the district, planning district occupies right now. They're sort of, kind of like crunched in there a little bit. And if there is growth in programs, if there's continued need or a new emerging issue and you needed to add staff or something, there would be a difficult place for them to go. Now, our pandemic and our COVID drove us to a hybrid environment, so that plays into it as well. But just know that physical space at the office they have is I think right at where it needs, right there, not much extra located.
How much space is it?
It's 3,200 square feet.
And a point for the new members, I was told that they do own the building, is that correct?
Yeah.
The whole building or just your?
Versus rented space.
The section that we occupy, we own. There's suites on either side within the building that are owned by other.
There's space downtown that, John, we looked at that 4,000-foot building with the parking by it. That I think it's 4,800 or so that Tom Boyd has the listing on.
Yeah, and if I could, Mike, what I would say is my characterization of the space is some of it is dependent on some of the other questions that Mike has sort of hinted at in terms of programs that we currently operate and whether we're the best place for those programs long term. And I'll put a fine point on it to begin the conversation. Specifically, programs where we're providing services and doing client interaction, not in person, but elsewhere. And I think the pressures that we get from the state for that sort of thing in terms of needing new staff and sort of saying, I'm not sure that I have that desire to grow that part of it, or if the commission has directed us to grow that side of it. So I think those two things sort of interplay. The other piece about the space is, as happened in February, we had a commission meeting where 18 of 21 commissioners showed up, and we couldn't get all 18 around the table, and that doesn't happen often, but it happens. And so it looks at, okay, what are our physical space assets, and really what should we do?
Let's get to the survey. I want to make sure we have time, not huge values of time for the work we want to do. So the survey was sent to about 130 stakeholders, partners, and clients. And really, I would characterize it myself as sort of a high-level response. You know, what we're going to get from these folks. It's going to be real nitty-gritty and but I think the idea here was to start a conversation around planning and areas of work that could be influenced by the board, the staff, et cetera. So you really want to get on, you know, program content, how's that hitting you in the various localities, the relationships that the district has, staff has with our counterparts in the counties and so forth. So that's really where we wanted to focus on. Also program delivery and how successful that will be. So we had maximum of 67 respondents, or about half the people we sent it to responded. And people who know surveys, you get 30% back, and you get that's your average response. So I felt good about the response rate, so it's higher than average. We'll just get right to the questions, the easy ones. Most responses came from Culpeper and Fauquier on the question 1 of where you at. Question 2, how do you interact? 35 or 69% of the respondents work closely with RRC on at least a monthly basis. So yes, we sent the survey to the people that we knew. Right? We didn't go out to the citizenry of the various localities and ask people, well, do you know about the Planning District Commission and so forth. So it was a known audience. We take that as an assumed situation. But the important part is that people who responded know the district well, so they know intimately, so to speak, what is going on, and then can offer a good response or a thoughtful response to some of these questions. How would you describe relationships? Most survey respondents are partners with a high level of knowledge of the work and respond at least monthly. So this is a very active, robust, dynamic relationship in most cases. The question about productive and positive, I didn't expect a different answer here. Patrick himself, as the executive director, and the staff are very well respected. The relationships are good. So as a board, you should feel good about how well this district is working in cahoots and consort with the various localities. It's a very positive response here. Oh, we have another person. Hi.
Hey, Jennifer.
Did she get a lead name tag as well?
She does not, unfortunately.
Trust is high, relationships are in good stead. So I think to me, that's a foundation for being able to react to emerging issues well, to continue the hard work on the current issues, and just know that you're not worried about how things are going down at the grassroots level. How can we improve the relationship with you and better collaborate with partners in the region? And this didn't surprise me either, but the idea that outreach, communication, interaction is constant. You just can't do it for a while, then stop, and then take a break, and then pick it up later. It always has to be a part of the mission of any PDC or any organization that's in the space of facilitation of issues and so forth. So just know that if you didn't know that now, that's a key part of this outreach, because it comes up later as maybe the commission and staff could be working a little more intensely around outreach. Are you familiar with the commission's work? Yes, 39 out of 51 stated they were aware. Do you believe others in the community are aware of the mission and work as well? There was a category of, if you remember the survey, if you look at the report, and I can speak to the page, I think maybe important to page 11 at the top, question 8. It was sort of a choice of not familiar to very familiar. So there was a chunk of the data that was sort of in the middle. Yeah, I'm somewhat familiar to sort of moderately familiar. I'm not intimately familiar with what the district does and the services it provides. So there's always, that again, this didn't surprise me, because in other just organizations that are in this space and the continuing intensity with which you have to provide that outreach, to maybe move those people over to okay, I know exactly what the commission does and so forth. So it's a constant battle. I don't think it can be considered a negative response. I think it's just where it is, you know. Enough said. So the next question is how we better educate, how we get this, increase this awareness. So there's a number of cited comments that are in the report, all taken from the survey comments offered. Patrick talked earlier today about he went to, I guess you went to Rappahannock County and you've been to a couple of events and staff goes all the time, or they're at events today, so maybe they're doing what they need to do and can do right now, right? So, but these are some comments, interfacing in county meetings across the region with other agencies perhaps. Maybe somebody who answered this or offered a comment didn't even know how much they're doing, right? So these are just ideas that come forth. I think the last one's interesting and maybe can be considered a purposeful, thoughtful thing to do, which is deeper training for community leaders. And I'm not sure what that means. The comment didn't go any further in explaining what they meant, but I think it doesn't mean all of you necessarily. I think it means maybe there's a formal way for the commission to reach out to even not-for-profit leaders or whatever, just like maybe there's an event that could occur that's not occurring now that might provide that deeper training. So I think that was interesting. I apologize for the question 10. The Likert scale which categorizes the ranking kind of thing. The question was worded a little funny, so I'm going to clean that up too for the final report. But it did give us a little bit of ranking of what people who responded to the survey thought about the various parts of the PDC and how they reacted. So staff interaction, project leadership was highest ranked, while not far below, but below, slightly below, connecting with clients and working on the right issues was a little bit less positive. So again, I don't think it's negative, it's just what people perceived as who they work with and where they are in the world. So the top 3 priorities for those 50 some odd people who responded to the survey are listed. What I thought was interesting, and the ones that we're going to talk about today are the top 3, but this last one around community development, I think that's an interesting term, and I may pause and reflect back to you what you think community development means. Does it mean the SEDS data and more economic? Or does it mean, is it a large framework of stuff that all PDCs do that includes some of these other things as well? Does anybody want to offer a comment on what they think community development could be or would be?
My only guess would be that it's kind of a combination of the housing and other things to improve the community.
Like a quality of life thing?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Any other thoughts? I think that's great, Mr. Chairman. Okay. I wanted to say that was offered in the comments a couple of times, and you take it with a grain of salt whether they who responded know what community development means, right? But I think that's right. I think it's all a holistic approach to, like a gentleman from Gordonsville was speaking to me earlier about, well, Gordonsville's got a public pool and they used to have a hospital. I mean, that's a complete community of services, right? So I think that's sort of what it's how could they improve their impact? How could the commission improve their impact? The idea of wraparound services for clients, instead of like a one-off or a one-time, okay, you've got them in the housing entry thing and you kind of swipe your hands a bit. I know that doesn't happen, but that's the idea that they're getting at, is you want to see that from beginning to end, right? With either you or your partners helping you to do that. Again, the greater awareness of services comes up, and also the idea that rather than sort of working through this hierarchy of government, board, local government, all the way down, you sort of scoot around that and you speak directly to groups or citizens to get their input on specific questions. So that's offered as that last bullet under question 12, seeking input directly. While surveys can do that, you're not going to necessarily get the right answers or the volume of answers you need if you sort of have a survey like this, when you've got to go and talk to people and ask specific questions. It's interesting, question 13, what are the barriers to the service? And transportation is one of them, but transportation is one of the ones that you're all working on vigorously, so sort of this, catch-22 kind of thing. Continued question 13, the public lack of knowledge of PDCs in general, and I've seen this statewide. This is not a Rappahannock-Rapidan issue. This is a statewide issue. The PDCs are a governmental entity. They sit in the middle. It's sort of removed slightly from state government, slightly removed from the local folks and local government, so you have to make an effort to understand what PDC is all about. Some express that there with PDCs and state and government entities, there comes rules, protocol, and guidelines, and they really, really appreciate just direct action and not a lot of rules around it. They just want to be helped, and some of the rules are barriers to access. And the last question was, else is on your mind? Very appreciative from responses of the commission's work. Again, for leadership and staff involvement, very active and great relationships around. There was one comment that I thought interesting, and I've heard this in various other work that I do at the university as well, that boards and committees should look like the communities they serve. And that's hard, very hard, and the issues around diversity, equity, and inclusion are difficult to wrap our heads around, but the idea that there could be some action across all organizations to improve that, or at least have the intent to improve. So I'll leave that there. So here are my areas of planning consideration. Unlike a full-blown plan where you have goals, and objectives, and strategies, and metrics and measurements of success, for me today, I think it's just where we want to sort of look at. Where are the areas of work that we're just talking about right now, which could lead to further action or further definition of where we want to go, or it means it's a continuation of what you're doing. So high trust, excellent relationships, we're good there. This area of work of community awareness, we've got to sort of maybe think about that and how that's done better. Does it involve all of you? It could be something that you in your daily work, but y'all are busy people. Maybe there's something else different to do that could help this, I'm not sure. Again, my point of constant interaction with stakeholders and clients and everybody else of who the PDC is, what they're doing and their various program elements. And I noted office space there as something to consider. Increasing outreach marketing efforts to community leaders. The idea came up from, I think it actually came up from staff, that there could be some regional listening sessions to identify emerging issues. As the transportation work grows, as it's expected to grow, there could be a change in how that's led and managed through an independent entity. Something to think about as we proceed today and through time.
Like an MPO or RPO type?
Yeah, some independent 501c, something or other that could, and not, again, this is not that the commission is not doing the work properly, it's more of a workload issue. If you could remove a burden, so to speak, or remove a work, you could work on something else that's emerging, right? So it's just a matter of how important it is and what your perspectives are. The housing issue, the idea of this unification of thought and getting a few ideas to work on rather than a zillion ideas that come from the bottom. You could have, the idea came forth to maybe host a workshop, the PDC to host a regional workshop, to talk about the housing issue and create a framework which draws out those ideas that are most relevant across the entire region. And then the entry access for housing, think has been an issue for all the PDCs who deal with housing, but for this particular one as well. So to think and how we can improve that is important. We're almost done, a few other things. If indeed programs are increasing, service-oriented programs, and Patrick mentioned it, that'll be my last point today, there could be consideration of some staff capacity increases in certain areas of the work of the commission, including grant writing. I think currently, Patrick, correct me if I'm wrong, but a program lead like Michelle in the Environment and Ag Systems, if she's going to be helping with grants, if you could remove that work effort from her and give it to an independent grant writer or someone on staff, she could do the more participatory kind of work that PDCs are known for.
I mean, the model with grants is typically it's staff writing grants, and a lot of times, depending on the program, that grant comes in and then it pays for some of that staff or other staff person's time to implement the grant if you're successful with it. I think the idea of, if you've got a grant writer specifically, that's fine, but it's always about where's the capacity funding that's supporting that person. And then you've got things you can throw in that would be, what's the success rate, that's how you measure, but that's not been the model, just based on the traditional way that things have been done.
Sure. Board's concurrence, just talk about the office a little bit, see if it's an issue that's rising to the top for additional consideration. You could figure out some parameters around what you might need and what you might not need. If you don't think it's an issue and you're good where you are, then that's okay too, of course. Also want to throw out that perhaps there could be more long-term approaches to planning, maybe 3 to 4 years out versus just our work today and considerations for the immediate. We were talking about that, and Patrick mentioned a minute ago. This is board. PDCs are board-driven organizations, so if you thought that the PDC should be working on something, then there's a need to direct the action to the leadership. Again, that's a given for many of you, but the new members, that's something to think about, that it's a directed approach where you would ask the leadership of the commission, Patrick and others, to do the work that you think needs to be done. Lastly, housing and homeless are connected in part, and I think that's a varying level of work that needs to be addressed in some way for the various localities. Somehow identifying that, at least in your own heads, from the localities you represent, how those issues are, the nexus of those issues and how they're interacting.
And Mike, if I could, that last bullet point,
Yeah.
if that was from our discussion, I think I would reverse it, whereas homelessness is not the immediate need for the commission, but I think what my intent is that homelessness is typically that type of service base is operating in a crisis, what's the immediate thing we're dealing with right now, whereas housing is much more, in my opinion, is a long-term discussion for a lot of other pieces there.
Thank you for listening, and I would now like to have discussion among the board. If you have questions about the work that you just heard about or the report, we have discussion around any questions or comments that you may have. Yes.
Who did the survey go out to besides obviously board members?
Patrick, would you?
Sure. So we pulled, as Mike said, it's predominantly stakeholders that are working with us on various programs or committees. Staff at counties and towns, as well as nonprofits that we're working with, but generally people that we're engaged with. So I think some of the answers, because it was self-selecting and then who responded, I think some of those are because it wasn't a general public survey.
Okay, thank you.
Comments or questions, anyone?
For transportation, it seems to me that was more around public transportation?
I would agree with that. I mean, I think probably the discussion internally is about, one of the programs budget-wise and what we're doing is the Transportation Collaborative, but much more about coordinating volunteer programs and then trying to work with, Virginia Regional Transit, other public transportation options. And I think, again, my opinion only, but I think the conversation about another organization would just be if it gets to a point where it's big enough and has enough partnerships that, is able to place that or another, entity that would be formed. I think, I don't know that that's an immediate thing, but that certainly would be the intent there.
So it's the transportation operations piece, not the planning piece.
Yeah, and actually, I think-
My MDO question came up, like, what are we saying? Are we
why I
getting
was
to the
asking
MDO
the
level or not, or whatever, but
Right.
it's not the planning.
But you
That's
do
more
the
in-house.
you do the regional transportation planning part for rural transportation.
Right, and we do a lot of that with, with DRPT for the Transportation Collaborative. But yeah, that's right. I think it would be much more on operations, because right now, as it stands right now, with the call center that came up is contracted to Encompass. They have a staff of, I think, 3 full-time and 1 half-time that is funded entirely through the grants that we receive and then contract with them. And I think sometimes they have a hesitancy of, well, we don't really want to grow it anymore. We're not comfortable with this. And I think if we say if the need is there and we can, and the funding is there to grow that, then we should at least have the discussion. So I think that's where that piece came up on the operations side.
In my opinion, the need's there. I mean, just in terms of the number of people that don't have regular access to transportation, it's kind of a barbell thing. You're seeing more elderly people that are somewhat limited, and then you're also seeing those that are younger, where when I was 15, everybody drove. That's not the case anymore. So I'm seeing the public transportation being used more, and I'm getting questions as a board member in Culpeper about what could be done.
And I think, one thing that I would say is with Virginia Regional Transit, we just contracted with them to do the RAP Connect service, which is meant to be sort of a fail-safe for if we can't provide with volunteer transportation, there is a service to provide primarily medical and for targeted populations, the elderly population. But often in the other jurisdictions that have contracts with VRT to provide, either fixed route in-town service or in some cases service into counties on demand service, I think we've found them to be, willing to have discussions, but, also very much, here's our model and here's how we develop it, and maybe not being as willing to engage in some of those innovative, if you've seen Winchester, they've basically, done away with their fixed route and have gone to an entirely, okay, we're gonna do on demand in town. And I'm not advocating for that, but I just think thinking through some of those things long-term is where, we've sort of sometimes bumped up against, feedback that's like, no, we're not gonna do that, or we're not interested in talking about that.
Actually, one of the things that came up with staff, and I didn't put it in that PowerPoint, but the idea of microservice, is that what Winchester's doing?
I think that's what they call it, and I think that's one of those terms that's getting pushed around now as, sort of all-encompassing, but yeah, I think generally that's what.
You're moving from fixed route to mobility. That's what's
Okay.
Right.
The term micro is a little confusing to me to use in that context.
Well, how would we, is that something we could get maybe a grant from DPRT to study that?
Yeah, I think we could. I think they would be very much in favor of, looking at, they've done similar in more urban areas, like Albemarle and Charlottesville have a program that they've developed. But there was a presentation they gave maybe about a year ago from DRPT about, funding those sorts of things. That is what they'd like to do, is see a study first and then, potentially some, a couple of years of, kind of pilot funding. So that would certainly be something we could pursue with them.
So in general, we have ideas of what we've been exposed to, what a PDC might be able to bring information together, coalesce from this group. But there's all these other PDCs that are doing all kinds of different stuff. And I may have mentioned this before or dreamt about it. Should we be identifying the great works of those other PDCs to see if there are things that we're not thinking about that would like, geez, we could do that in our PDC.
Right. And you did, I appreciate that, Mr. Clerk, because you did mention that. You're not dreaming it, I do recall that. I don't think we have that today, but I think that's something where, I often fill out surveys similar for PDCs, and so rather than recreate the wheel, I'll probably go back through. But I think that would be something we could certainly bring back in June. And, I think my interpretation of my conversations with Chair Catlin and then, passing on to Mike is that this is really meant to be talking about, what we're currently doing and what might not be in it, but it's not meant to be something where I need direction that we need to decide this by June. This is very much, give us ideas and then tell us what you're comfortable with to the staff.
Yeah, and I think the point that our region is really diverse, from 7,400 population Rappahannock to whatever it is in Fauquier now. A lot of people, relatively, and our designs for the future and our access to transportation. But then at the same time, northern Fauquier is not a lot different than a lot of parts of Rappahannock. So there are many differences and many similarities. So I think it's important for us to figure this out. Normally we just try to ride the coattails of everybody else and just jump on your successful programs where we can.
Copying is a good thing. It's working.
Other comments or questions?
One of the things that struck me about the housing is that, I've certainly found it, in my experience, is that the housing issue is a twofold issue. The one is to generate, to fill the need, all the operational components of it, but the other is a political. And I've seen that the political obstacle, not only in my local area, but I've seen it other places, becomes very powerful. And I think economic. I mean, you hear that the amount of 2,000 square foot houses has gone down, I think, 80% over the last 20 years. And that's because there's no incentive for developers to do small houses because the profit margin's too small. So I think we're dealing with one chunk of it, but it seems like there's these other chunks that somehow need to be addressed, for lack of a better word.
Building on what we're just saying with that housing piece, the flip side, developers not being incented to do it, what I see for boards is always in the background, the fear is when is the number of houses going to drive the number of kids to where I have to build another school?
Yeah.
And that's the 50, 70, 80, $120 million financing question, depending on what size school you're building. It just absolutely dominates. I mean, there are elected board members in here who can correct me if I'm overstating it, but I just feel like as long as you've got a little capacity, it's like, okay, well, that project might be good, or, maybe we know that developer and they build a good product, so okay, we'll rezone or whatever. But as soon as it starts to get to that, oh my gosh, high school or middle school, or it's all the debt capacity you have for a long time and a tax adjustment that comes with that. And it's overwhelming. Until we figure out a way to handle school financing a little differently, it is going to always be a big part of the disincentive to provide enough housing for folks who live in our communities.
And to build on top of that is that it's not only schools, but it's other parts of infrastructure.
Yeah, roads.
Roads.
Water, sewer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't look at the threat so much as you cross a threshold and you have a huge capital expenditure. To me, every house is, and I think this is pervasive in our thought in years, every house is an additive to the operational expense of the school system. We've got 20 some odd schools and they're all pretty old. And you know, you have to repair roofs, you've got to do parking lots, you've got to repair HVAC, so you've got a lot of mini CapEx replacement costs. And, you know, I think if you add 100 kids and sprinkle them around the school, the county, it's going to cost more for a handful of more staff, more teachers, more classroom aides. All those things just cost money. So to me, it's every house, you know, it's been going on for as long as I've been around in Fauquier. They just don't want more rooftops of any kind, and it's not about the CapEx, it's about the OpEx.
But then that gets back to the issue that I was bringing up early on, is that affordable housing becomes a challenge with affordable housing. I mean, I've seen it in the county in which I grew up that most of the people who grew up in the county can't afford to live in that county anymore. And we're experiencing now, to a certain extent, in Rappahannock, and certainly in my town.
And
One-
kind of, go ahead.
One thing I see in Rappahannock anyway is our comprehensive plan says we want to build in our villages, grow the villages, which sounds great, but there's only one village that has septic.
Sewer.
Sewer,
Right.
in a town. And so to incentivize people to build in the villages, the expense of wells and your septic system is not cheap. So I don't know, I mean, I know we're not gonna put in sewer system in Flint Hill, which is in my district. And I've got open space that people can build on, but they're not.
I think it's somewhat intentionally a circular thing, you know, want to develop, see village, go to village, want to develop, go somewhere else.
Yeah,
Oh, we can't develop? Oh, I didn't say that.
right?
It's a very effective tool, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Culpeper's learning to copy that a little bit.
So, you know, I mean, I think it's generally held that rooftops can't pay for the services ever. But then, from an economic development world, and back to SIDS, the businesses, they want to see rooftops and workforce in order to justify investment. And so you gotta, you know, what's leading what, and I think in our community, we're more of a steady state viewpoint. But those communities who want to invite businesses, you need workforce, and they're not coming unless you have the rooftops. And so it's this, you know, circular thing that is really tricky to manage, because if you allow those rooftops and you don't get the bump from the business, then it's gonna be a struggle to pay for.
Well, I think that it is a regional issue insofar as the rooftops in Fauquier are folks who work in Prince William and can't afford to live there.
Sure.
And the rooftops in, you know, Rappahannock are,
Yeah.
not so much, but
Yeah.
maybe Madison, you know, further out.
Yeah.
Are the folks who work in Fauquier and can't afford to live there.
That's right.
And so, you know, we each are pushing our workforce a little further out. We had a discussion about this yesterday, and I think there is, we have a lot of discussion going on about this, and, you know, maybe we have to wake up and have the political will to incentivize some sort of workforce housing. Nobody likes the word affordable. You know, in so many cases, it is, there are, you know, you're subsidizing or you're looking for a certain demographic income-wise, and when you put all those folks together in one project, you're not maybe creating the best opportunity for those folks versus if you can integrate them with the rest of the community. So there's in Warrenton, there's a massive project that was just proposed in the last couple of weeks. It'll have something like, I think, 300 or 400 apartment units, 70-some townhouses, a first ever in our county, a parking deck that will handle 490 cars, parking garage, and it's going in an area that was a strip mall that had some extra land, and as is the case in the town, they of course have their own zoning. So the town of Warrenton makes this decision. Well, guess what? They don't have to pay for their schools. So
We got that issue.
yeah, the town has a very different set of incentives. And so the county says, no, rooftops, we don't want that. But the town says, well, we want the economic development of these younger folks, but maybe the way we get there, this has been suggested, that we say, okay, this is affordable housing, but it's not just income driven, it's, you have to actually work in this county to qualify. So if we're gonna go out of our way to attract folks that aren't necessarily tax positive, well, maybe that's how we reward our teachers, firefighters, and service providers in the county. So that means the more rural counties won't have to be housing our workforce, and we're not housing Prince William's workforce. Seems a little more fair, but
I like it. Is it legal?
have no idea.
Thinking of coal camps right now.
You know, it reminds me of there was a development, I think it's out in, somewhere close to, Gary, I'm gonna look at you, because it's close to Gloucester. It's Middlesex and Essex, maybe, kind of. I just remember there was a presentation I saw from Virginia Housing where they had a, apartment complex that was built, but their target audience was teachers.
I think that is Middlesex.
And, the question of is it legal, I think, came up, and I think it was something where it's not, it's not restricted only to those individuals, but there's some mechanism of, there's rights of not first refusal, but they get first dibs on things. I'm sure somebody could dig into that.
And I think there's a way through in employee compensation that you can get at some of the same things the other way around. So if it's your teachers and your firefighters and your law enforcement,
We can give them a voucher or something that helps them in these places.
Great discussion.
then you have to ask handouts.
Yeah.
So model programs along these lines might be, that
Wait,
would
we
be
can find them out there. Yeah.
nice for all of us to know more about.
It's too far of a commute from Orange County to Rappahannock, so all your houses aren't helping me.
Well, our new deputy clerk used to be
Yeah,
Rappahannock's school clerk.
Yeah.
So.
But she was commute to us.
She was crazy to you, so people are doing that sort of stuff, and, we're always, every week in fear of losing public safety personnel to all of our neighbors.
Sure.
Culpeper just increased all the starting pay, and I heard about it immediately.
Well, and ultimately, it's Prince William that's driving,
Yeah.
right? Everybody, the prices go up and up and up.
That's why we hire from Page.
Yeah. The gradient.
We have pressure from Charlottesville. We're 20 minutes from, less than 20 minutes from Bantown, so we get, Charlottesville's a high cost of living, and it helps the salaries of people who live in Gordonsville. But now it's starting to affect our housing prices. It used to be quite a bit more than ours. It still is more, but it's really pushing our housing prices up.
And we've talked for many years, and it's something similar to what you're doing with the Ben and Mary's?
Yep.
Is incentivizing somehow people that have, or the houses that are kind of falling down because families passed away and somebody inherited but did nothing with it, so the house doesn't look great and it's just kind of a nuisance at this point. Is there a way to incentivize to turn those kind of buildings or old barns or whatever into housing that would fit in and beautify the area at the same time? And just have never really found grants or anything that would help that situation. Instead of building a building that's not going to look like it works for Rappahannock County, is there a building we already have that we can work on?
It was a great discussion and a perfect lead-in to the remainder of our day today. Going to get you to get up and move around a little bit and shake off the great box lunch drowsiness. But here's what we're going to do. Captured a bit of notes. We're going to take what we've learned, or you already know, and we're going to go through a bit of a process with you. And the process is called a carousel approach. where we're gonna divide up, probably by threes. So groups of three will go to one of the spots where the easels are in the corners of the room. We're gonna give you some time. There's a category listed there. For example, this is housing and homelessness. They're different, but at least they're sort of paired a little bit together. And we're gonna rotate after a certain amount of time. I don't determine time, maybe it's 15 or 20 minutes. And the times as we rotate will probably decrease, but you're gonna list your ideas that for you, what's affecting your locality under those categories. And thinking big as you can right now, what your priorities and issues, but just sort of list maybe what you've heard today already or what's in your own head about the various issues around these content areas: environment, ag systems, transportation, housing and homelessness, and whatever the last one, oh, internal and finance and administrative is the fourth category. So what we're gonna do is, I'm gonna ask, may I ask, you're Jennifer, right?
Yes,
Are you staying for the next little bit?
I'm staff and I'm observing.
She can, yeah, she can.
She can help, okay, great.
Okay.
May I ask what your area of expertise, I know I've not met you before. What's your area that you work in?
Mostly housing.
Okay, great. So, well, I'll talk to you in a minute there. You'll be our scribe if you don't mind, Jennifer.
Sure.
To divide up into three, I'm gonna ask, since I'm gonna help one of the groups, and maybe Patrick, if you don't mind helping one or being a part of it, we're gonna just ask you to, we'll count off and then we'll go to each spot and then we're just gonna work together. One person, if you don't have a professional staff scribe, pick up the pen and start writing your ideas under that category of those priorities and issues that are in your locality under those content areas. Does that make sense to you? We talked a little bit about it today, but the housing discussion was great. So just be sure that you capture what's affecting you and your locality, because you know better than anybody else about what's happening in the various places.
And
Questions about our process?
Only thing I would say was I would venture we could be more, we could be quicker than 15
Okay,
minutes. On
15 minutes?
I think we could probably
Be like a
faster, but
15,
that's just my guess. So
15-10, like 5-5 or something, just to be able to rotate around and capture your ideas.
Fourth rotation, everything's already written down by
Yes.
somebody else.
Yes, exactly.
One question about, of the areas that we're talking about, I know that one of the things that, that became a big deal over the last week is PFAS and PFOA, the EPA's new regs that have come in.
Plastics regs?
These are forever chemicals.
Okay.
And, I mean, our initial estimates are, for Fauquier, we're looking at low end $20 million, high end $100 million to fix the problem in the next 5 years.
Oh, boy, okay.
So I don't know if y'all have gotten to that level of detail, or if you have as big a problem as we've got. But it's going to be a big issue. And we've actually been talking about perhaps connecting our water systems to Prince William County to buy water, which our brewery uses well water from, it's anathema to what we all assume. But if there's PFAS in the well water, then we gotta figure out either clean it up or you buy it already cleaned water from somebody else. So, but that doesn't really fall into any of these categories, and maybe it's not an appropriate discussion today.
I think it's great discussion. And I've actually written it down on the environmental one over here. That's okay,
Okay.
Mike.
All right,
So just add to it whenever you get there, okay?
all right.
I don't know enough about it to discuss it.
Well, maybe I can do a 30-second primer and whatever. Do you want to talk about it now by now?
So, yeah, EPA has been working on this for years, reestablishing what is an acceptable level of these chemicals in drinking water. And what just came down last week is 4 parts per trillion, or the equivalent of a drop in an Olympic-sized pool, is what they consider now an acceptable level of these known carcinogens. And they're man-made chemicals that you'll find in waterproofing materials, so 3M spray-on, Scotchgard, Glide, dental floss, every fast food wrapper you'll ever have. They're all coated in PFAS. and we're not doing, EPA has said, we need to get this out of the drinking water system, but it's everywhere. Now, it's even in the rainwater because it cycles. And so anything above 4 parts per trillion has to be fixed in the next 5 years in municipal drinking water systems. So if everybody's on private wells, you don't have to worry about it. But our service districts all have municipal systems. And so we are required to monitor and fix. And it, it could be $1 million per well to put in the kind of, plus heavy operational expense. You have to run it through charcoal filters, et cetera, to fix it. And so that's the issue.
So the thing that's probably important for the rest of the region is we all get our water in very different ways. So some of us get it out of the Rapidan River. We're told preliminarily that that source is pretty good because it doesn't have a lot of industry on it. So we may be lucky in that setting to not have to deal with it. But, it remains to be seen. It's still being tested. We're still in this testing mode, and some of you don't get your water there. You get it through wells. And what was the industrial history of that part of your county? It only takes one plant with a screwy manufacturing system to pollute the water table in that area for, decades and more.
One of the best known is firefighting foam.
Exactly.
If you have a place where firefighters practiced,
That'll do it.
that can saturate ground and get into the water supply pretty quickly.
Thank you, Ike, for bringing that up, and yeah, I think it's an interesting issue for the PDC to consider as we all move forwards.
Yeah, I would say, as Mike said, think big. That doesn't mean we can necessarily do much about all of it, but I think that's what we're looking at.
Probably influence water supply planning.
Right. Yeah, that's a good
original.
point. And the other thing I would say too is if you're approaching this from not just from your locality but from the commission standpoint, the main thing I would want to reiterate, especially on transportation and homelessness services, is if we are engaged in a service providing role, the pressures to grow that not only from state and federal government but also from generally people that work in those fields. I personally would prefer some input from you all if you think that's our role long term and what that means for the executive director in terms of capacity and hiring, or if a better approach would be where else do we look for pushing those programs.
So legally, there really aren't bounds on what you can do as a PDC. It's really the sky's the limit that we all agree on that we want to tackle as a like mind, right?
Yeah, and then down to funding in terms of
right.
how do you do it. But yeah, no, that's right. I mean, the code is pretty wide open. So.